Welcome back to another episode of the Marketing Quacks podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dozer, and if you're new to the show, the mission here is to expose the quacks and gimmicks in the marketing industry while featuring some great marketers and entrepreneurs along the way. On this episode, I'm excited to welcome my guest, Justin Brady. Now, Justin is the founder of Cultivate. He's an experienced podcaster, content creator, and also just an experienced marketer overall. So, Justin, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. I'm really excited that you asked.
Yeah, you have a pretty good podcast yourself called The Justin Brady Show, so I'll have to funnel some people over your way after this episode. So, for those listening who haven't heard of Justin Brady, let's just do a quick intro on who you are and what you do.
I amplify inventive people. And so people may call that within the marketing area, maybe within the PR communications area. It can be definitely dropped under the communications area, but I amplify inventive people because I know a truth that they don't, which is the best idea is not apparent to anyone. If you have the better idea in the marketplace, chances are you're going to be completely ignored because people are scared of great ideas. So I take people with better ideas and amplify them to bigger audiences.
I love that. So, what separates, I guess, let's start with The Justin Brady Show. What separates that from, the hundreds of other podcasts out there that are trying to accomplish a similar mission of what you're doing?
Yeah, the podcast is morphed. It used to be way back in the day. It used to be called the Creativity Cultivator podcast. And it started out that way because of a piece I wrote in the Wall Street Journal about what separates like the creative organizations from the non-creative organizations. And what that is organizations that listen, empathize, and trust their people. It really is that simple. If you haven't ever figured out what it is, there you go. There's what it is. So the show is designed to tell those stories, and each guest would go over like somewhere where they failed like miserably and how they recovered, how that turned them into who they are. Over the years, it changed into the Justin Brady Show, and that was after I did a stint with iHeartMedia and had I think it was people like Mike Rowe, Pauly Shore, 6 presidential candidates in the studio, and that was called the Justin Brady Show. And so after my deal with iHeart ended, I just merged the podcast and that show into one thing, and kind of the topic went more of the direction of interviewing like leaders who were doing something totally unique and cutting through all the crap. And that was it's definitely more of a communications angle. Like, how did you break through? How did you how do we communicate to our audiences, but also more of a leadership angle too.
Yeah, I definitely respect what you're doing on the show. And I've noticed you've had like Chris Hogan is a big name, Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang. Yep. Who would you say have been some of your favorite guests so far that you've had on?
Ooh, probably guests. I mean, that's tough because most of them are my favorite guests. Kind of like, people make the same joke about like your children or something. But I think like the white whale, like the big whale that I got was Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks. Like, that guy is incredible. So yeah, that would be my big get, I would say, is Howard.
Nice. That is a big one.
Incredible dude. Incredible leader.
Yeah, I'll have to listen to that one. I don't think I listened to that one. So let me ask you this, Justin. How do you maintain consistency as a podcaster without sacrificing the quality of your show?
It's a good question. My podcast, to be clear, is updated randomly. Now, I recommend if people are trying to build an audience, it depends on what your goal is. So my goal on the podcast is straight up find good information on my website that'll help people that want to communicate to their audience. I do that via written word. I do it via audio. And of course, I push those up to the podcast. So if someone's trying to build an audience, which I'm not trying to do, then I would recommend, be consistent. I tell everyone, be consistent. If you're going to do it weekly, maybe bi-weekly, same time frame every week, always be consistent. So I say that because people are going to go to the website, find the Justin Brady Show, and notice it was updated 2 months ago. Because that's not my goal. My goal is not to build an audience, and on that, my goal is to provide resources on that website for people who want to communicate. So how do you maintain quality and consistency at the same time? Any content, that's pretty difficult to do. It's quite intimidating, but you need to essentially set the bar at a reasonable level when you start any content strategy, any communication strategy, and make sure it's something you can maintain at peak quality. Because if your quality dips, no one listens, no one cares. So an example of that would be people wanting to generate like a written blog post every week, and then they're like, well, I'll just I can hit every week, heck, I can hit every day, I'll just have AI write it for me. right? Bad idea. AI can't create. And I'm willing to have the debate on whether AI can create or not. It
I'm
can't.
excited to talk about that here
Yeah.
shortly,
It,
but yeah.
yeah, it can't. It can remix. And usually people point out to me, well, that's what people do. Yes, which is why 95% of our organization's ideas are not that creative. And so, it's a debate I'm certainly willing to have. But basically, be at the beginning, set a consistent tone that you can actually deliver on time and time again. And sacrificing quality is never okay. Like, never, never.
Right. Right. Let's talk about promotional strategies, because a lot of podcasts out there, they have on these guests, they have these episodes, but they fail to promote themselves and
Right.
they fail to actually grow. So talk about some promotional strategies that you've used that you've seen actually work in the podcasting world.
Yeah. So I'll talk through the lens. I want to be very clear. The reason my show did quite well is right time, right place. When I started out, it was almost a decade ago. I'm actually going to write down that question so I don't forget, because there is a backstory here that is important. But my show, I always tell people, it looks like it kind of grew organically. It did not. The advantage I have is, at the time I was writing for the Washington Post, and I went back to some of these guests. If you've anybody who's ever written for the Washington Post, any other publication, does fully realize that not everything you write goes out there, and guests get cut all the time. And so I went back to some of these guests and said, "Hey, it really sucks that we did this interview and all of it got edited or cut out. That just sucks. Would you do a podcast with me? It's not affiliated with the Post. It's my own thing." And surprisingly, most of them were like, "That's great." So early guests were like Matthew May and David Burkus, and even Dan Pink was early on in that. And so I was a little different. People were finding my articles online and people were Googling my name and finding the podcast. A little bit different. If you have that kind of, um, uh, uh, I don't know, if you have like a respected channel like that, then it's a little easier for you. But that's kind of the hint right there, is to promote your show, to promote anything. You need to do it through what I call trust channels. And so you need to find out who your audience is. You need to find out the publications, people they follow, books they read, YouTube channels they watch, that they already trust, and you need to find a way to work into those organically. And there's a process for that. Anybody can do it. It's find out who the channel champion is, who's actually the person that makes the decisions. If it was at the Wall Street Journal, that would be an editor of a particular section. If you're working on life and work, that might be Chip Cutter, that might be Jeffrey Regow, and go to them and say, "Look, here's some value that I know you want, and I will give you this value if you give me exposure on your platform." That's literally how great PR works, but that's how great communications works. And the best strategy to grow, to answer your question very directly, a podcast is, again, through those existing channels. But if you don't have any, here's what'll blow your mind. The best channel is doing physical talks, like getting out there in the open and meeting people and shaking hands. Like, it blows my mind how effective that strategy is. You can pour tons of money into advertising, buy a bunch of Facebook ads, or you can go to an event that has like 100 people and tell people to subscribe to your show, and they will. Like, it's ridiculous, the conversion difference. And so when I talk to people, I will say, like, especially if it's a session about like digital marketing or communications or something, I will literally hold up my phone and say, "Take out your phones, Google my name or search my name on your podcast app. You find it, show it when you have it. Cool. Hit subscribe." That right there is the most effective way to get people to subscribe to your show or your digital content. Like, just face to face. That's the fastest way to grow a relationship. Relationships just don't grow that fast digitally. And so it's going to change, right? Someone
Right.
is going to point out, "Well, hey, actually, in this case, it's more effective." You're probably right. It depends on who's your audience, what's the fastest way to gain their trust and respect. And when you gain their trust and respect, it's easier to get them to commit to an action. So it's about understanding what their trust channels are.
Yeah. No, that's really good advice. Obviously, face to face builds that trust factor a lot
Yeah.
quicker than digitally. One thing I've actually been surprised, Justin, you're actually episode number 50 after I published this, is that even after doing 50 episodes of this podcast, I've been shocked at how many thought leaders in the SEO space and marketing space in general have actually been on my show
Mm.
just from a simple outreach. People love to get out there. They love the backlinks that come from podcasting. They also love the content that comes from all the short clips that they can share on all their channels. So, long story short, as I'm rambling here, I'm very, very surprised to see some of these thought leaders in SEO and marketing be willing to join a smaller podcast like mine.
Yeah, good. Good job.
I mean, no, I'm just saying, like, I never thought it would happen. You know, you just
Yeah.
shoot your shot and people you never thought would come out of the woodwork and join your show.
There's something to be said about just ask. There's definitely something to be said about just ask people. And it blows my mind that people like this is why I got my first piece that like national published piece was in the Wall Street Journal, like the first one. People were telling me you got to work up through smaller publications, and that's not what I did. I just tried, and I was talking with a buddy, and he's like, I was telling him, the greatest limitations we put are or the greatest limitations we face are the ones we put on ourselves. And he's like, okay, so you're writing, right? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, what's the biggest publication in the country? So we just Googled it. It was the Wall Street Journal by circulation at the time. And he's like, okay, go write for them. And I'm like, well, I mean, they're pretty big. And he's like, what'd you just say? So I literally wrote a piece that I had been working on and sent it to him, and they actually ended up running it. So yeah, if you don't go, and the thing is, you have to ask respectfully, obviously.
Right.
Like, some people think that I need to look big. I want to look big and important. Therefore, I need to come across that way. And then they represent themselves in a way that actually big, important people don't represent themselves. So they think it's like ego. I'm going to push my weight around. I'm going to say someone, I'm a badass and you should come on my show. And that doesn't work because the bigger the name, generally, the bigger the name, the more like they clawed their way to the top, self-made, like truly self-made. They're generally pretty humble people because they remember what it was like to be dirt poor. They remember what the struggle was like, and they're super thankful that people took a chance on them, because people do need to take a chance on you for you to succeed. So when you do find those super successful people, they're actually very kind most of the time. And so if you come trying to shoot your shot out of a position of arrogance and you just go, hey, it's probably not going to work for you.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. So last question I have on the podcasting topic here. So anyone who's like looking to start, right? Entrepreneurs, small business owners, it's always that debate of how do I get started? I have no time. I have limited resources. What would be your advice for someone why they should start a podcast and put efforts into it versus all the other things they could do, right? Writing blogs, social media, all the other things they could spend time on in terms of marketing and promotion. Why podcasting?
I mean, I don't know if podcasting is the right solution,
That's
truthfully.
very true.
It could be a bunch. For some people, podcasting is actually quite difficult. It does take a unique skill set to be able to do a podcast in a way that connects with other people. That being said, there are people who break podcast rules all the time and do quite well doing that. So I mean, I don't want to dissuade anybody from starting a podcast. Like, starting a podcast can be a really effective tool at building relationships quickly. You go to a website, you read something supposedly written by the owner, or you see photos posted of maybe whatever's posted on the website. It only goes so far into building a quick relationship with people. But my gosh, if you have a podcast and you are like posting consistently there and people really get to know you, they kind of feel like they start to develop a relationship with you. That's a way faster method to convert new business than anything else you could do, except for video. Video is pretty good too.
Well, that's what we're doing here, a video podcast. I
Well,
like to refer to this as like a content flywheel, right? So I take one long form video, throw it in like an AI tool, like an Opus clip, chop it up to 15 short clips, take that, make social media from the transcriptions. You could write blog posts, emails. There's so much you could do now with AI to go from a long form video like we're doing. So let's dive into the AI conversation
let
now.
me put an end cap on that for anybody, because just to emphasize that point, you need to figure out what your audience already trusts. If your audience are not podcast listeners, don't do a podcast. And the other thing is, if you only get, have realistic expectations if you're doing a podcast or any media for that example. One of my clients really early on in my communication journey, we were getting for them, I want to say, I don't know, a couple hundred hits a day. And for me, coming from the Washington Post, I was incredibly disappointed because I was used to seeing tens of thousands of clicks per day. And I went to their marketing director and I was like, dude, I'm really disappointed. I don't know what I've done. We failed big time. And he's like, what are you talking about? We're getting 100 to 200 clicks a day. I'm like, yeah, I know you're not experienced in this, but that's bad. And he's like, I don't think you're experienced in this because that's great. He's like, there aren't 100. They were in a very, very niche industry. And he's like, there aren't 100 to 200 people a day that care about this topic. So it's like we're getting everybody in the world. So have realistic expectations. If your podcast has 100 downloads or even 50 or even 20, that might not be a bad thing. That might be champagne pop worthy that you're building a relationship with that many people. So have realistic expectations before you go into any content, podcasting, etc. But
That's a
sorry,
good
you wanted
point.
to talk about AI, so sorry about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Before we dive into AI, I had one little insight here that you've probably noticed this too on your podcast. I run into people all the time at events here in Des Moines, whatever, and they're like, "Oh, I heard your episode on this," or "I heard this," but they never like anything. They never tell me. And it's funny. We call those the lurkers, right? People that are actually listening to what you're doing and they care, but they don't go out and publicly like all your stuff socially or digitally.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, I know that can be a bit frustrating for sure.
Hey,
And that tells something to, if you're a loyal subscriber of this show, of Ryan's show, everybody, like, my word, just like it or share it somewhere. Like, Ryan's giving you all this free content all the time, helping you learn all the time, and you're not sharing it. Like, that's one of the most basic things you can tip him is share a show or tell people how much you like it. And you're right, Ryan, like, no one does that. And now I'm thinking in my head, what are the shows that I listen to and get a lot of value out of that clearly I'm not paying for them? Well, what can I do to pay a source of internet currency? And that would be share it or maybe backlink to it, like put something on your website and say, hey, Ryan's show is really great, check it out.
yeah, it's Andy Frisella, share the show, man. I love his podcast. So let's talk about AI now. So you mentioned that you're a pretty staunch stance on AI. You don't think it can create, you think it can reproduce, which I completely agree with that. So let me ask you this, Justin: are you using AI right now in your workflows for anything?
Yes, lots.
Talk about what your process is with AI.
Absolutely. So I am a very firm believer that AI remixes and repurposes and does not create. Now, maybe I'll be wrong in the future. Maybe I'll be one of those famous people that's wrong and AI becomes sentient, but I don't think so. AI
Yeah.
has the appearance of creativity because we judge its success alongside other uncreative company efforts. So I often say to people, leaders really don't, they say they want creativity and innovation, but really they don't. They want the results of creativity and innovation. They want the iPhone. They don't want the absolute mess and expense that came before it. And so when people say, I mean, every company, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, Ryan, but do you know any company that's not innovative?
I mean, they all say they are,
Yeah.
but most aren't probably.
Yeah, they all say they are. So that's the problem is if it's like what's the enemy in the Incredible syndrome, I think. If everyone's super, no one will be. If everyone says they're innovative, it starts to dilute the creativity and innovative pool, right? Nobody knows what innovation or creativity even are anymore. So when someone says to me, AI can be creative, I'm like, I think, what are you judging that against? And they're like, well, it made this beautiful AI art. And that's what an artist does. And I'm like, that's okay.
But it
Like,
still repurposed it from somewhere in its database.
repurposed it. And that's not what an artist does. And artists create something that's very unique that you're like, whoa, my brain's never seen that. Like, that's great art. And some of the great artists of our time, we were over in Paris going to the Pablo Picasso Museum. Amazing. If you're in Paris, holy crap, people, you need to go. And that guy's obsession was true art. He was always trying to find out what's everybody doing and how can I not do that? And then people would catch up to him and copy him. And then he'd go into this is why you see his art form change so many times, because he was always trying to be truly edgy and truly creative and truly different and send a message through his art. He was a true artist. But then there are artists in his museum that basically just copied his style. So are they really creative as Picasso? Is that really creativity? This is a debate that artists and philosophers have been having for thousands of years. But I would argue humans, the reason we think AI can be creative is because human creativity is pretty low bar much of the time. Like people don't try, they don't take the risk of creativity. So you
I
ask,
agree.
what AI tools am I using? AI tools I'm using are remixing the content I produce. So, Descript is one I use a lot. It transcribes podcasts. It transcribes podcasts. That's pretty much the main reason. And it has like some cool AI tools for like audio waveforms that save me a lot of time. Of course, ChatGPT by OpenAI, use that a lot for one particular project. We take the podcast, and I won't say who the client is, but we take the podcast transcript, or they do the podcast, we transcribe the podcast, we upload the transcription into ChatGPT and say, write a show note summary, it must be in this style. We have a huge like custom GPT we built for this thing. But and of course we always review it, but my word, it's good.
I do the same thing, actually.
So good. And I have no problems using AI that way, because you already did the hard creative work. You already did the show. You already planned the show. You already asked the human questions, the questions that require human instinct. You already did that. So now if you're transcribing and if you're writing a show notes summary, you're just redoing the same thing you already did. That's not very creative work. That is something a machine can do. A machine is good at replicating what has already been done. So I have no problems using AI for those reasons, or using thumbnail images. Like we use thumbnail images to just sell the idea that's already there. Now, do I want to buy art from an artist that's using ChatGPT? No, because that's not what art is. Art is about connecting one human to another. But I'm totally fine with people using AI tools to replicate work they've already done. That's what AI is great at. Like, I don't know about you, but anyone who's done a podcast doesn't want to sit down and rewrite the same thing that just happened. Like, here's this show I just recorded, and now I'm going to write a summary of the show I just recorded. Like, that is one of the most unhuman things.
Which
Now,
pre-AI, Justin, that's what people were doing.
right. Yeah. I mean, I've done so many show notes, it makes me want to puke. And it's not creative work, but it can be done creatively. So if you do have a passion for writing and connecting people, and you want to use the written word as a unique way to connect the podcast to people, that's fine, but not necessary. Now that being said, can you enhance your show by having a completely custom written by a human show note summary, like a great piece of journalism? Absolutely. And would that enhance the show's quality? Absolutely, it would. But there's a sliding scale of how much is too much or how much is enough. And so AI, if you're going to use it, bottom line, if you're going to use it, it's a good remix and repurpose tool, and it's a good tool to remix, repurpose, and re-engineer. It's not a good thing to create. So I always say AI in the content pyramid of new ideas, AI is the capstone right here is you and your original ideas. All the blocks underneath, repurposing tools, like that can be AI, like taking a show and clipping it up in a bunch of different things and finding heading. That stuff can be AI. That's,
I love repurposing content with AI, whether it's short form video clips that you probably see floating around the internet everywhere, blog posts, show notes, social media posts. Repurposing long form content into short form, in my opinion, is one of the best use cases of AI right now, like you just alluded on.
Totally.
So you mentioned too the Picasso thing. Just a quick comment on that. I heard a long time ago, Justin, that good artists create and great artists steal. That was a quote that I've heard a long time ago, and Bing Ads I think is a good replicate of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, good artists create, great artists steal. I mean, it's a quote.
It's a satire quote, for sure.
It's a great quote, I guess. But the that and this goes back into art, the debate of art, which can you truly create something unique, right? There's what's the scripture? There is no new idea under the sun. I couldn't quote the exact verse, but yeah. So there's the sliding scale of creativity, like what is, and this goes back to the debate of what's true art.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about PR. You do public relations in your 9 to 5, your full-time job. Let's talk about how you think AI is impacting PR, because I do digital PR work as well. I don't know if we've touched base on this offline yet or not, but I do a lot of digital PR work, and AI is flooding reporters now, right? Through pitching, through responses. You have tools like Quoted banning AI. I mean, there's all sorts of other ones, Haro, all the other PR platforms that are against AI. What are your thoughts on AI in the world of public relations right now, and where do you see this going?
Yeah, again, it comes down to don't let a computer do a person's job. A person's job is a relationship building, and AI is not going to do that. And so, yeah, I have various projects, and I'm getting pitched from PR people for those projects. It's weird because I have certain projects that I work on that I get pitched, but I'm also doing the pitching in some cases. So it's a bit odd. But yeah, don't use an AI to do a human's job is what it comes down to. And so I do have like these long, really well written pitches coming from PR people, excuse me, that are clearly AI written, like clearly AI written.
They use like delve or realm or, some of the typical terms.
Yeah. Like they're using words that I don't typically see written, and I'm like, who passes an email through multiple rounds of editing for a simple pitch? Like the answer is no one does that. And so when it's like been professionally edited and it's super polished, and I'm just like, I'll often respond to some of those people and say, can you try again without using an AI tool?
That's
But
funny.
you're not like, you're robbing yourself, because AI is going to go out there and it's going to do its best job finding other things that match your parameters, and then it's going to use those parameters to try to create that email that you want. That's like the worst way to go about it. And so it's the best way to go about it using AI for to pitch a journalist would be to expedite the research process. So use AI to help you understand who they are as a human. So pulling up Chat GPT, if you want to pitch a journalist at the Wall Street Journal and say, tell me about this editor, tell me what patterns exist in his writing, tell me about his most popular pieces that he's written, and tell me what kind of companies he likes to cover. Like using it is that in that way to understand someone more deeply. That's a great way to use AI. But whenever you want to connect to another human, don't sell yourself short and send a robot to do a person's job. A person's job is to build relationships with other people. Like that's what makes us truly human.
Yeah.
And don't have an AI do that, because you are selling yourself short. And also, what the AI is probably going to do is the majority of people like in the PR field and communications field, sorry, but the majority of them do the stuff they say not to do. Like they write template pitches, they pitch it to a couple thousand people. So 9 times out of 10, probably 9.9 times out of 10, the AI is going to pick up the bad habits, and it's going to represent you with bad habits generated all over the freaking internet. What it's not going to do is be able to approach that journalist or that editor or that podcast host or that YouTuber in a way that's uniquely human. And
Yeah.
some of the best success I've had pitching journalists is just me being is me being human more. The success I have pitching journalists, getting clients onto whatever, shows, whatever, is the more human I can make it without being weird, the more chances, the more that increases my chance of possibly getting a pitch. So like yesterday, um, what was a good example? Yesterday, I sent a journalist after this interview. I was like, yeah, I thought my client was absolutely crazy too. Like the guy sounds crazy, sounds completely nuts. And then I saw his factory and I was like, holy cow, this is real. And so being real with journalists like that, they don't expect that. And I've received some really big wins in like the Wall Street Journal and some other places for just being really brutally honest and authentic with people. Now, there's a scale there. You don't want to be too honest with people because then it
Right.
comes off as creepy. But if you can find that balance of professionalism and vulnerability and humanity, that's usually the best way to connect to other people. And that's what AI struggles with.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice that you just gave there. So let's talk about like capping off the AI conversation here. Where do you think, like you talked about AI photo a little bit or AI images, and now AI video is kind of the next big thing with Sora from OpenAI.
Mhm.
Where do you see this all going with AI video and AI photo generation in the near future, and how this is going to impact marketing, content creation, or anything else that kind of we're involved in?
I don't know. But I would have a guess, which would be the more AI ish and fake the industry goes, the more advantages real creators will have. And so the only comparison I can point out, and again, I could be wrong on this, but the only comparison I can figure out is, or point out, is while everyone was going digital and CGI, some of the better movie makers, James Cameron, I think, is one good example, were choosing to use film just because they wanted that real art form, that real humanity. Now, is it that people noticed it was film, like subconsciously, and appreciated it more? Or is it the fact that that told the story of the film and it was more real? We have people like Willie Nelson's son, Lucas Nelson, who is not recording digitally, but he's recording analog at in Nashville. And does that is he rising in popularity because of that? Do people like his music because of that? Who knows? It's a debate. But again, it goes back to real humanity. And when you can tell the story of how real you are, I think that's going to be the competition in the future. Is the bad marketers will just use AI and all these digital tools to scale up and create more noise. And the truly great marketers will create more humanity. They will find ways to get closer to their sales targets in a way that's uniquely human. I think that will be the advantage of the 21st century, is using AI to show how human you are, not using it to dehumanize your organization.
I agree 100%. We're at the point now, Justin, with like deep fakes, especially in
Yeah.
politics and whatnot, where now we question as humans, is that real?
Right.
Where before, when I'm growing up, I don't ever remember thinking to myself, like, is that real? Could that be faked? Is that a deep fake? And now that's my first reaction to almost every video that I see,
Exactly.
which is crazy to even think about.
Yeah. And as soon as you get caught, just from a marketing or brand perspective, if you have people suspecting it's an AI and then you get caught, and not caught in like a controversy or a legal kind of way, but people just catch you not being human, it really dilutes the brand. People kind of lose a little bit of brand trust. And so, yeah, we need to be really careful. It's kind of the similar pushback. We've seen this before, the similar pushback on like photoshopped women in magazines, right? And like there was huge pushback to the point where a lot of brands came out, and I don't have the brands in my name right now, but a lot of brands came out and said, we're not going to Photoshop anymore. Like this is creating a dangerous precedent. And, you have a lot of models in, both men and women that now are unphotoshopped. People brag about that. Again, we've seen the fake before. That's not new, but it backfired on the industry. Like it created some problems and it created a lack of trust in brands. And the way the brands won that trust back is by saying we're going to show humanity's imperfections because that's real.
Right. And here's a quick story I'll share with you. You'll appreciate this. You're in the PR space. I used to compete against a site called Go Banking Rates. You've probably heard of them. Very big, owned by Red Ventures. They actually had one of the best PR wins of all time, and it was a chess move. And what they did was they would write financial content and blatantly say this was written by AI. And oh my God, everyone's like, how could you write financial content written by AI? But guess what happened, Justin? The Wall Street Journal picked it up. All the news outlets picked it up. And they got all these 80, 90 DR high authority backlinks, like 10, 20, 50 of these. And in the long run, I'm like, oh my God, that was the most genius PR play of all time.
Yeah. Again, going after chasing humanity.
Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. So I want to talk about marketing quacks now, Justin. This is the Marketing Quacks podcast, after all. I want to hear from you. What are some marketing tricks and gimmicks that you've seen people do in your line of work? So anything related to podcasting, PR, content creation, etc.
Okay. So marketing, you're saying bad tricks and gimmicks, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I think one of the ones I see a lot, at least in communications, is fake press. I see that a lot. So I'll see people posting, they'll do a press release, which anybody can do a press release. And there are a lot of websites that just scrape those releases, like Yahoo News will do this often. And they'll just run the same press release, and then people will post on their website, like as seen in. Like I see that a lot. And that's kind of, that kind of is cringy stuff. I'll see people. The other thing that I really don't like is paid contributed content. I don't like that stuff either. And I feel like that's pretty dirty. And actually, Forbes got in trouble. I don't know if you remember this, but they kind
Forbes Business Council, isn't it?
They have Business Council. They have Forbes Voice. There are some other organizations. And a lot of digital publications are trying to do this, capitalize on the fact that people want to contribute. But that's a filthy practice. And I would warn anybody, like, if you're going to pay for play, you got to be really careful and get some help before doing that, because that can just destroy your brand. When I see someone who is like, claims they're a writer for XYZ publication, and then I go find out they're in a paid program, there is nothing more filthy, in my opinion, than that. And I'm at this point, maybe the content was like really great. I'm not even going to read it, because I was like, you didn't earn your way in there. You just bought your way in there, and they're just accepting a check for you to write for them. You didn't do anything unique. Now, that being said, maybe their content's like top rate, but like Forbes really diluted their platform. And I mean, these days, journalists and people in the PR industry, like if someone's a contributor, and don't get me wrong, I have a few loyal friends, like dear friends, that are contributors for Forbes, and they are freaking smart people. But every time I see someone's a Forbes contributor these days, sorry to anybody that's a Forbes contributor, I take that with a big grain of salt. And so, do you want your first experience, your first exposure in the industry, in the wherever you're trying to gain ground? Do you want people thinking, is this person like a real contributor, or did they buy their way in there? And so, I think Forbes Voice, or I think that Forbes Brand Voice, I think, is the name of their paid program. Like I said, a lot of publications have these programs. That stuff's dirty. I would really caution anyone, be really, really careful of paid contributed content. Be careful of like bot traffic, or buying Twitter followers, or X followers. There are some podcasts I know of and that have been in the top 20 for quite some time, and I know who they're, because I have connections like anybody else. I have quite a few connections in the comms industry. I know who their brokers are. I know who they're buying listens from. And I'm not going to call them out, but they're like, those individuals I will never work with, because they are dirty, and I don't want my brand associated with them. And I've had some of these creators, some companies want to work with me, and I'm like, I'm not touching you with the 10-foot pole, because at one point it's going to come out how dirty you are, and that's going to smear me. I'm going to go down with that ship, and I'm not going to do it. So I would
I'm with you
caution everybody about
100%.
pay for play content. Be really careful there.
I'm with you 100%. And that's a great piece of advice. I was so oblivious to how PR actually worked until I started getting into it. I'm like, oh my God, they were featured on Forbes and US News and Yahoo Finance and this and that.
Yeah.
And then like now I'm featured on some of these publications, like, oh my God, this is a joke. Like I don't even go and like brag about it. I just know how easy it is to
Right.
get into those publications now.
Yeah.
It's just so funny. But yeah, man, this has been fun, Justin. Any final notes that you have for anyone listening, just on anything that we talked about, whether it's AI related, marketing related, PR related, podcasting, just any final notes for listeners here?
Sure. Final note is that no one cares about your great idea. And, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory sense. They just can't. People aren't capable generally of seeing. Now there are a few people we could get into, that small group of people that are capable of seeing great ideas without nudging from their networks. But in general, people are incapable of seeing great ideas out there in the world. So when you put your idea out there and you naturally think, this idea, this product, this service helps my core demographic that I'm going after to such a degree, all I need to do is get a press hit. All I need to do is put an ad out there. All I need to do is post on social media, and everyone will see it and do business with me. That's wrong. That's always wrong. Not like Will Orville and Wilbur Wright flew. Like that would be pretty significant. I think you'd agree with me. That would be pretty significant. And the news, like the New York Times, didn't cover it until years later. And like you'd think that would be newsworthy, but what did gain coverage is someone's sermon. This is something Jason Pfeiffer talks about in his show. What did gain national coverage is a guy's sermon about the dangers of teddy bears. I learned that on the Jason Pfeiffer's one of his shows like a couple years ago. So clickbait, there's two things. Clickbait's not new. That's been around for a while. But also, the great idea never, ever, ever wins. It's always the idea that is communicated best. It's always the idea that's communicated through the trust channels that your audience has already developed.
I agree. 1000%. So Justin, where should people follow you online?
Find me on X. I'm at Justin Brady, or go to my website at justinkbrady.com.
LinkedIn as well. I follow you there. You're a good follow on
I'm on
LinkedIn. So
LinkedIn
yeah,
too. Yeah, it's always that structure /Justin Brady. Yeah, so
yeah.
/Justin Brady. Yeah, but
I'll leave all those in the show notes
X is
below for
by
people
far
to
the most
find and
fun
whatnot.
platform at Justin Brady.
For sure. Well, Justin, thank you so much again for joining the Marketing Quacks podcast. And thank you to everyone for listening to this episode. Be sure to tune in again next time.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Appreciate the invite.